Well, good evening, everyone, and if you could find a seat, we're going to probably get things started here. First of all, I'd like to welcome everyone tonight to this year's Fall Upson Lecture Series. My name is Hyatt Frobos, and I'm the current president of Food for Thought, and we're excited to have you all here tonight and appreciate you taking the time to be a part of this lecture series. Before getting into the background of the Upson Lecture Series, I'd like to bring up a representative for two of our financial contributors for this evening's lecture from American Ag Credit and Frontier Farm Credit. I'm going to have Janet Barrows come up and talk a little bit about their organization and why they believe that it's important to support our group, as well as land-grant universities such as Kansas State University. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Hyatt, and thanks to all of you for taking time in what I know is a busy time of year. My name is Janet Barrows. I'm with Frontier Farm Credit based in Manhattan, and Greg Reno from American Ag Credit is with me tonight, as well as several of my colleagues from Frontier Farm Credit. We're pleased to sponsor this evening and also to invest in Food for Thought because it really does represent things that are very critical to our industry. Furthermore, the Upson Lecture Series honors Dr. Dan Upson, a man who has made a remarkable contribution to the lives of generations of people who are now in agriculture. It was probably a couple decades ago that I sat in the lecture hall and listened to Dr. Upson and studied hours and hours and hours in his class. I took away from that not only knowledge, not only a science background that propelled me through a career in communications, but also a great sense of the dedication that Dr. Upson had within this university and a standard of excellence that he set that I think we can all appreciate. And that's why it's so great for us to be able to support programming at our land-grant university, because that standard of excellence is something that we have to constantly strive to attain and maintain for an industry. And what better way to do that than to bring forward very critical conversations that we all need to have. Sometimes they're not easy, sometimes the topics are difficult, but being able to share in a room together and hear a speaker to be inspired and challenged is a great benefit, and we are appreciative of the leadership of the students and faculty that have made this happen. At this time, I would like the students from Food for Thought to stand and be recognized. You're doing some amazing, amazing work, and it's appreciated by industry. Frontier Farm Credit and American Ag Credit are borrower-owned financial institutions. We serve nearly 10,000 farmers, ranchers, and agribusinesses throughout the state of Kansas. For nearly 100 years, Farm Credit has been financing agriculture. We pay patronage to our borrowers, and we invest in the communities that we serve. Our business is financing the dreams that you all have in rural America. We are a cooperative in structure. In essence, we are the local in communities because of that cooperative structure and governance. Our relationship with Kansas State University is special for several reasons. Many of our customers are graduates of the College of Agriculture. They benefit greatly from the research in the College of Agriculture and the other colleges across campus. We're privileged through our intern programs to work with Kansas State University students. Even though we just don't market to K-State students, we end up with some fabulous K-State students in our buildings. And our association supports scholarships across the university. And for those who have left the university, have graduated and are in industry, we scholarship for them the master program so they can continue their education. We believe the opportunity to work together and the need to work together has never been greater. And again, we appreciate the opportunity to be involved with Food for Thought in the Dan Upson Lecture Series.
Thank you, Janet, and we thank you and American Ag Credit for your support. In the fall of 2009, a group of undergraduate, graduate, and veterinary students came together informally to discuss the growing disconnect between the public and agriculture. The result was the creation of Food for Thought, a grassroots group of K-State students and young alumni who seek to bridge this gap. The average consumer is currently 2 generations removed from the farm, and as a result, an interest in where food comes from and how it's produced is rapidly growing amongst consumers of all backgrounds. Food for Thought believes that it is our duty to provide our peers and community members with accurate, factual information about agriculture and to provide opportunities to discuss food production. In addition to bringing speakers to campus, our group maintains a social media presence via Twitter, Facebook, and a blog, and partners with agricultural organizations across Kansas to promote agriculture to audiences throughout the state. Tonight, we are excited to announce that the Upson Lecture Series recently became fully endowed thanks to the generous donations of the Kansas State University veterinary medicine classes of 62 and 66. Their tremendous generosity ensures the Upson Lecture Series will continue to make great strides for American agriculture and connect producers and consumers for years to come. In November 2010, Food for Thought hosted a lecture by world-renowned animal behaviorist Dr. Temple Grandin. It was announced at that event that Dr. Grandin was the first in a series of speakers in the new Dr. Dan Upson Lecture Series. Dr. Upson taught in the Kansas State University College of Veterinary Medicine and the Department of Animal Science for 35 years before retiring with emeritus status in 1994. He received several awards for his outstanding education in the classroom and the veterinary profession, including the All-University Undergraduate Teaching Excellence Award, the Outstanding Educators Award, and the Award of Excellence from the American Association of Bovine Practitioners in 1994, as well as Kansas State University's highest award, the Alumni Medallion Award. And last but not least, one that he's particularly proud of, he was the first inductee into the Cattlemen's Production Veterinarian Hall of Fame class. When you think of Kansas State's history in agriculture and veterinary medicine, nobody has had a bigger impact on teaching students than Dr. Dan Upson. Dr. Upson has made numerous contributions through the years of his teaching on our campus and continues to work with the beef industry and veterinary profession in this state and beyond. Please join me in acknowledging Dr. Dan Upson. Thank you, Dr. Upson, for your support and dedication to the agricultural industry. And with that, I'd like to ask Dr. Dan Thompson, one of the advisors of Food for Thought, to come up to the stage to introduce tonight's guest.
Wow. Hyatt is always a hard act to follow. First of all, thanks for the turnout. Thanks for everybody coming. I think we're going to have a great message this evening. But it absolutely amazes me when you see a group of people. You know, we keep saying, well, you're tomorrow's leaders. You know, you're not tomorrow's leaders, you're today's leaders. And continue to lead us and continue to take us forward. And Hyatt, thanks for all that you've done. Tonight, it's my privilege to introduce our guest from Montana, Mr. Bruce Vincent. He's a third-generation logger from Libby, Montana. Bruce helped form and is currently serving as president of commodities for a Great Northwest, the executive director of Provider Pals, and is the co-owner of Environomics. Bruce speaks throughout the United States and the world, and he testifies on issues for resource issues before Congress, and he's appeared in the news programs such as 60 Minutes. Bruce has been named Timberman of the Year in Montana, the National Forest Activist of the Year. He's received the Agri-Women's 2007 Veritas Award, and in 2004 received the inaugural Presidential Preserve America Award from President George Bush. Bruce has been married to his wife Patty for over 35 years and has 4 children, 2 son-in-laws, 1 daughter-in-law, and 11 grandchildren. His current activities represent a family commitment to responsible environmentalism. Please take this opportunity to learn more about how not to become the career of last choice, and give a great K-State welcome to Mr. Bruce Vincent.
Thank you, sir. Thanks. Is this guy on? Can you guys hear me okay? Awesome. I'm going to get my rigging straightened around up here, and while I do that, I'll fill you in a little bit more on my background so you have a bit better idea why a logger is here to talk in the Upson Ag Series. That'll also let me get what I had for lunch back where it belongs. I don't know how many of you like to stand up in front of people and talk, but it makes me sick. And all those tricks they teach you in ag communication about how to do this and not have bile right up against the back of your throat. I haven't found one of the tricks that works yet. I'm imagining all of you naked. And I don't know what that's doing to your stomach, but it ain't settling mine, I can tell you. So I found if I fill in biography a little better, then bile goes back where it belongs. I am from Libby, Montana. Has anybody ever been to Libby, Montana? Not a soul. Tourism's our future. It's a little town of 2,800 up in the northwest corner of Montana. In fact, I was telling Hyatt when we came in, you could stick my entire town, buildings and all, in this building. Not a very big place, timber and mining between Glacier Park and Idaho against the Canadian border. It was started by timber barons. Back in the old days, you guys have studied, anybody here in the forestry school in the old days, timber barons were real. They would whack trees down until they ran out. They'd build cities around there, and then they'd move and whack and move and whack. Well, the family that started my community started in Maine, whacked trees down there in the 17 and 1800s, built Boston, then went to Michigan, whacked trees down and built Detroit. Went to Minnesota, whacked trees down and built Minneapolis. In the early 1900s, they looked across the prairie and it was just grass until they hit Montana. They found an area that they could buy. They purchased some land around our area. The Great Northern Railroad had just been completed, so they loaded the sawmill and the community up and started Libby, Montana. They're part of our great heritage of conservation and stewardship, though, and that's one of the reasons it makes sense to have a logger in front of an ag group. We are in crop agriculture, too. Trees are a crop. It takes 100 years to figure out whether or not we've screwed up, but they are a crop. And one of the exciting things for us and the Niels family, that was the timber barons' names, is when they started looking around, when it came time they were finishing the management of their land and they needed to look west again, they saw the Pacific Ocean. So they knew that there wasn't another stop. Someone else had already been there. And they started working on the first in the world sustainable forestry management plan that was aggressively looking at how do we stay in one place and manage. And they decided that in order to do that, they needed to be planting as well as harvesting. They needed to be disturbing the forest in a way that allowed the forest to remain healthy for the next 100 years or 200 years. So they developed a 200-year management plan that is still studied by the World Commission on Forestry. And as a kid growing up in that little timber town, my family's been there for over 100 years, that was a great sense of pride that I had growing up there in a forestry family with a deep sense of stewardship. But when I went to college in Portland, Oregon, after graduating from high school, it didn't take very long to figure out the kids I was going to school with didn't look at me as a steward. They looked at me as an axe-murdering Neanderthal. According to them, I was murdering the trees. One of the summers when I was home killing trees, I met my wife, PJ, which isn't entirely true. She was not my wife when I met her. Although I tried that. I'd been in a logging camp a couple of weeks. I went to town, and there she was. She had a tube top and a tan, and I said, "You're my wife." She wasn't. She's a pretty strong-willed woman, and I'm still scarred from that stupid remark. But we fell in love, got married, moved to Portland to go to college together, and we learned that we had accidentally manufactured a child. And we learned that it took a lot more logging to go to school when there were 2 going on 3 of us. So we moved from Portland to Spokane. I enrolled at Gonzaga. I enrolled there, went to school with John Stockton, by the way, and I know the Cats, you guys play some basketball, so do we. I didn't go to school there because I could dribble. I went there because it was 3.5 hours from home. So I could go to school Monday through Thursday, and Friday, Saturday, Sunday, drive to Montana and log. On one of those weekends home, we accidentally manufactured another child, and PJ said, "Something has got to stop." So I quit school. Because we have our priorities straight. Actually, we didn't quit either one very good. It took 10 years and 4 kids, but we made it through Gonzaga. I got a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering, got a Master's in Business Administration, got a job with a construction company in that city of about 250,000, and we were on our career ladder to yuppiedom. And one night we were watching the kids play out in the yard, and we noticed 2 really important things. They were playing inside a chain link fence inside a city. And to this day, we are perpetually pleased that there are hundreds of millions of Americans who make the urban choice. We stayed up all night and talked about what we wanted for us and what we wanted for our kids. And we made what was for us a quality of life decision. We decided we wanted to raise our family in the luxury of the rural environment I had grown up in. So in February of 1984, we packed our crap in a U-Haul and we went back to Montana. We were the only loaded U-Haul going into Montana in February. We went back and joined the family logging company, and anybody in here ever met a family logging outfit? Looks like they went through Kansas a while ago. Family logging company is very much like a family farm or a family ranch. It's one of the other reasons it makes sense to have a logger in front of you. Vincent Logging, our iteration of it, was started in the mid-'60s, and in the early days of the company, on weekends, us kids and mom would strap coveralls on and hand dad wrenches. Probably sounds familiar to you. The goal was to have the machinery ready to operate Monday morning when dad hit the brush with the crew and mom hit the office attached to the house. Very similar to a farm or a ranch. They ultimately grew our family operation to include 65 other families. And in our town of 2,800, that's a big outfit. It is a small town, and a lot of the 65 were cousins. My dad once said that's why rural people wave, because you just never know. Might be some DNA going by. Hi. We lost mom a while ago, and 3 years ago we lost dad. So now it's my wife at my side as we try to figure out what we are going to hand to the next generation. In fact, while I'm here in Manhattan jacking my jaw, my wife is home doing my work for me. And she says it's no big deal. She does it while I'm there. She might as well do it while I'm gone. I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have met the sponsors, and by the way, thank you for sponsoring me, if everything was okay at home. And believe me, everything is okay inside my house. But if everything was okay outside of my house, I'd be doing nothing more than staying home with the most awesome mate on earth, doing exactly what I want to do in the place I'd like to do it with the person I'd like to do it with. But something has gone wrong in our timber communities. It started several decades ago. And it's really important for the rest of rural America to understand what's gone on in our timber communities, not because we're important, but because we were first. And I want to talk with you a little bit about where we are in rural America, and it's just one guy's view, where we are in rural America, and what you, the next generation of natural resource managers headed into the environment of rural America, what you're facing, how I think we got to where we're at, what we've got to do to make sure our ship doesn't turn upside down, and why after 30 years on the road, it's things like this that give me more hope than I had when I first started out. In Kansas State, a land-grant institution is a great place to have this discussion because you are the heart of what's going to be tomorrow for our rural areas. One of the things that I encourage you to do, though, is not what my generation did. My generation was known for being a pain in the butt. I was a student leader on our campus. I was the president of our school. I had hair down to here, and we had questions of authority. In fact, we demanded answers, and if we didn't get answers back that we liked or even just quick enough, then we burned buildings down and stuff, you know. We were a pain in the butt. We had questions. But my generation's biggest problem is sometime during the 70s and 80s, we stopped asking questions and started telling people what to think instead of asking them to please think. We decided we held all the answers. And the next generation, your generation, can't do that. Keep asking questions. You've got instructors, world-class instructors. Question them. Quiz them. Do the research. Don't take anything at face value until you've looked into it, including me. So keep asking questions. At this juncture of human history, questions are as important as answers because there's going to long be questions, and the questions are going to change over time. People talk about we need to have a sustainable future. Well, sustainability is not a destination. It's a pathway. And as institutions like this learn more through research, we're going to have to change our the known things in the world and modify our definition of sustainability as we go. So keep asking questions. Don't do what we did and decide you've got all the answers. So where are we? We're in rural America. We're having what I call a collision of visions. We're having a collision of visions with the rest of America that gives us the consent to operate in their environment, our social license, I call it. If the public decides that you no longer ought to be managing their environment, they will remove your consent. They'll take your license away. And we're having a problem with society. We're having a problem because for the last 50 years, they've had two things humans have never had before: time and money. And what they've been doing with their 2-week summer vacation is blowing out of places like St. Louis and Kansas City and Seattle and Minneapolis and Los Angeles and going to our rural areas. And they've been coming out here into rural America and communing with us during their vacation. And what do you know? They're falling in love. They're falling in love with the very things that we love about living in rural America. I moved back to Montana for 2 environmental reasons. The first was the natural environment. How many of you like clean air, clean water, abundant wildlife? Those are the reasons you come to a land-grant institution, to learn how to be with that and to manage that stuff. And we expect it right outside of our door. But the rest of society leaves the south side of Chicago, and where we live looks nothing like where they live. And they see what we're living in, and they think that, in fact, that it's a piece of America that had been lost. They've been watching TV. And here it is, it's real, it's still alive. I also moved back for the cultural environment. The last vestige of what made the greatest nation on earth is still alive in our farming and ranching and mining and logging towns. Hard-working, hard-playing, community-oriented, family-oriented, church-oriented, school-oriented people still live in our towns. And society thought that was also lost, the sense of community. And they come out and visit with us, and there it is, it's on the main street. In fact, if they're driving through eastern Montana at 85 miles an hour on I-90 and they see a cowboy in a field next to the freeway, they will slide to a stop. "Oh, honey, look, a cowboy." What's he do? I have no idea, but did you see the hat? They've got a stereotypical view of who we are and what we do. They don't understand it, but they love it. But at the end of their 2 weeks, they have to go home. And when they leave with the desire that rural people understand. It's a desire to protect. They want to save what they now call the last best places. And I don't disagree with their desire. They want to save what they perceive to be the last best forest. Don't disagree. The last best wildlife. Don't disagree. The last best prairie land. Don't disagree. But when they land in their home, they start fighting to implement their version of protection. They've got a vision that they're fighting to implement through legislative activity, judicial activism, regulatory reform, and they're imprinting their vision on top of us. But sadly, their vision for the last best places has one fatal flaw. There's no provision in it for the last best people. And if they don't change that, the very thing they want to protect is going to pay the price of their protection, because a policy they're clamoring for to protect us is having perverse reactions at the ground. And it's not because they're mean or evil. It's because policy in this nation has nothing to do with reality. The reality you study at Kansas State does not on its own enter the policy discussion. Policy in this nation is not dictated by reality. Instead, it's dictated by the public's perception of reality. And when it comes to the public perception of the realities you're studying in school, Will Rogers was right. He once said, "It ain't what you don't know that's a problem. It's what you know that ain't so that's a problem." And America knows a lot that just ain't so about this thing that they want to protect. And what we're seeing now is they're saving us all right. They're saving us to death. I got to see this up close and personal the first time when there's a big old fat headline in our local paper that said the grizzly bear is going to be augmented in the Kabanayak ecosystem. Well, I didn't know what any of that was except grizzly bear. I understood that part. It's a little bigger than a spotted owl and it eats folks. I knew that. It's also part of why I like living in Montana. We still have grizzly bears and wolves and moose and elk and all that stuff. It's part of the romance, but I didn't know what augment meant. Didn't know what an ecosystem was at that time. So we went to a meeting put on by Dr. Chris Servine with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. He was a 27-year-old grizzly recovery coordinator for Planet Earth, and he changed our lives. He explained what augment meant. He said, "You have a historic population of grizzly bears in your area, and federal law requires that we recover that population back to its historic levels. You have a remnant now. We've got to recover it." So we thought, all right, that sounds all right, but we had some questions. If you're going to recover the population back to what it used to be, we asked him, what did it used to be? And he said, well, we have no idea. We asked, all right, you don't have any idea, what are you going to do? And he said, well, we've at least got to have a viable genetic pool. How many of you in here are in wildlife biology? A viable genetic pool. We understood the concept. It's enough bears when they mate they don't have kids with 5 legs, but we wanted numbers. How many grizzly bears is a viable genetic pool? And he said, we have no idea. We think 90 or 120 would be a cool start. I thought, all right, 90 or 120, what would you ask next? If that's our target, we ask him how many currently live here. And his answer was, we have no idea. This is becoming a pattern. But he said, we think there are 4 of them here. Well, I have to tell you, my wife, PJ, is not from Montana. She was visiting her aunt's ranch the summer I met her. She was born and raised in San Jose, California. It was kind of a culture shock to move her to a town of 2,800 in the brush to begin with. But when she found out we have 4 grizzly bears in our backyard and they want to dump 116 more of them there, she got really excited about our ecosystem. The meeting was in the high school gym. She went over on the gym wall and she found the grizzly habitat, our ecosystem, and she found our house. My community is surrounded by 3 million acres of your forest, national forest. And she found our house on the map. We're 12 miles south of town at the mouth of Libby Creek. Biggest drainage out of the beautiful snow-capped Cabinal Wilderness area. It's a stunning place to live. But on this map, there was a gray hatch zone around the mountains, and our property and our house was in it. So PJ asked Dr. Servine, what is the gray stuff? My home is there. And he looked at her and said, well, ma'am, that's the human-grizzly conflict zone. That sounded bad. And she asked him, can we live there? And he said, yes, ma'am. She asked, can we live there like we have been? Can we send the kids out to play in the yard or fish in the creek and not worry about them getting consumed? And he said, well, you might have to modify a few of your behaviors. Has anybody here ever been to grizzly country? Bob Marshall, Yellowstone, if you go, they'll make 2 really important suggestions, huh? Go in groups and make noise. Those are the 2. If you go to the Glacier Park Chalet, they will sell you the bells that you're supposed to tie on your shoes and your walking stick. The theory is you go tinkle, tinkle, tinkle through the forest, the bears will hear the bells and run the other way. That night, Dr. Servine told my wife and I to tie bells on our 4 children before we boot them out the door. Then he said if there's a problem, if there was a bad bear, that they would deal with it. That's when we found out how they tell the difference between a good bear and a bad bear, do you know? Bad bears have bells in their poop. That's how they tell the difference. We got to looking at the Interior Department's own internal documents on our ecosystem, and according to them, not according to us, according to them, we have the highest potential for human-grizzly conflict of any ecosystem in the world, and it's because of that map. The habitat map of our forested areas are areas where there's grizzly bear food, and they don't eat trees. They eat berries and roots and shrubs and things that grow up when the tree crop has been removed. And when you map that on our 3 million acre forest, it looks like you stood 30 feet back and threw an octopus at the wall. There are arms of habitat running around in our forest. In places, the arms are 2 miles wide. Grizzly bears have a 50 square mile eating radius, and we live in between the arms. So they knew we were going to have problems there. And in that area with that potential, they're going to try things never before tried on Earth. Not even in the controlled circumstance of a zoo had they ever attempted cross-fostering cubs. But the agency had already purchased 2 grizzly bear cubs from the Detroit, Michigan Zoo that they're going to fly to Montana, stuff into a den with a black bear mother, wait until spring and see who came out. They're going to do embryo implants. They're going to take grizzly embryos, stuff them inside a black bear mom, wait until spring and see what came out. And we had some more questions. Do you know how grizzly bears and black bears get along? They hate each other's guts. We were looking at that embryo implant plan and we couldn't imagine the trip out of that uterus. This was not a well-adjusted bear that was going to hit the cave floor in 2 years. He's going to be pooping bells. We asked Dr. Servine why. He said, we have to do it this way. So we decided that he said, oh, by the way, you don't seem to understand. We're mandated by the Federal Endangered Species Act to recover this species in this ecosystem, and we're not here to take a public opinion poll. We're here to tell you how we're going to do it. And we reacted. We don't have a problem with the plan, or with the grizzly bear, but we had some terrible problems with their plan. So we raised a ruckus designed to get Washington, D.C.'s attention. We got all the towns in our forest to stand up together in a common cry for common sense. If we're going to be asked to coexist with Ursus Arctus horribilis, we at least ought to be sitting at the table talking about our common future. And we got Washington, D.C.'s attention. All of our big towns stood up, like Knoxon and Trout Creek and Trigo, and we scared them to death. They wanted to know what all 6 of us were doing up there. But because we stood up together and because it was a common cry for common sense, we didn't want to do away with the plan. Instead, we went to the University of Montana and worked with the Craigheads. Did you ever meet the Craigheads? They're awesome. They're the true grizzly bear experts, and we worked with their science. And they thought that it was a joke what they were going to try to do. So we got the science behind us and presented it. And because we raised such a ruckus, they dropped cross-fostering, they dropped embryo implants, they started using real science and flying up into Canada, 40 air miles north of my house, plucking surplus grizzly bears out of British Columbia. They still hunt them there, flying those bears down to Montana, dropping them into the brush and sticking a monitor on their neck. And we got to start the first in the world community involvement team for the preservation of a predator. I got to start the grizzly bear community involvement team. And on every Friday, or every other month on Friday, we get together in the basement of the Venture Motor Inn in Libby. We have habitat managers, wildlife managers, and just folks. We talk about raising grizzly bears and raising families. And I've learned a lot. And have you seen what the population of grizzly bears is doing in the Northern Rockies, by the way? It's up for the first time in a century and a half instead of down, because there's room for us and that bear if we were left alone. In fact, we can coexist quite nicely, because when it comes to manufacturing grizzly bear habitat in the Rocky Mountains, there are 2 ways to do it. Method number 1, we built a town on. Go out and selectively harvest some of those tubes of carbon. That's what a tree is, sequestered carbon. Take the tube of carbon to a processing plant in town, turn it into a consumable product for a consuming public, then reintroduce low ground-hugging forest fires to the forest that grows huckleberry patches. We can have bears and raise families if we were left alone. Nature's method is the other, by the way, and you're getting to enjoy that every summer now. Do you smell the fires from the Rocky Mountains? That's the other method of management. Nature chooses fire. We think there's a better choice, but we're not being left alone. And we got a message that I think all rural Americans need to understand. When we were raising our ruckus, they sent the assistant director of the Fish and Wildlife Service to Libby to see why we were so angry. His name was Dr. Leon Spinks, and he and I were having coffee at Henry's Cafe, and I was asking him questions like, why? Why this heavy-handed top-down command and control from 3,000 miles away? Why don't you come here and work with us? And he reiterated what Dr. Servian said. We have to do it this way. We have a federal Endangered Species Act. You have a remnant population. We must recover it back to what it used to be. So I asked him if he had ever seen the California state flag. Have you guys ever seen that? What is that puppy right smack in the middle of their flag? California golden bear is a silver-tipped grizzly. So I asked him, when you're done in Libby, are you doing Sacramento next? And he laughed. I laughed. It was after all a joke. But then he leaned forward and he looked me in the eye and he said, can you imagine the public outcry? I could. You know? And his flip little ha 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 sent 2 messages to me. Really important messages. The first message was to my brain. He was stating what he perceived to be a political reality. It was laughable to think they would try this crap in an urban setting with the political ability to strike back. Can you imagine the public outcry? But they were going to steamroll our rural area because we were seen as politically impotent. We couldn't do anything about it, so they were going to roll over us. Message number 1, perceived political impotence. Message number 2, though, hit me in the heart, and it's really important for you guys. Message number 2 from this, I got to work with him, and nice, caring, intelligent man, doing a job for society, protecting our environment. But message 2 was that when it comes to protecting our nation's environment, our rural population is seen as disposable. And I have since been to all 50 states, been to farming and ranching and mining and logging and fishing communities all over the country, and we're a lot of stuff in rural America. 95% of it's awesome, 5% we bloody well better work on, but there's one thing we're not, and that's disposable. And in this nation of 330 million voracious consumers, if they'd like to continue to enjoy the standard of living we help build for them while protecting the environment they have suddenly come to love, they would be ill-advised to deal out the people who have been providing from and protecting their environment for 300 stinking years. But before we get that message across, there are places paying a price. Our timber communities were first. Libby, Montana no longer has a sawmill because there are folks who have a vision for the future of our public land timber base that does not include human management. They include people like Jasper Carlton with the Fund for Animals out of Boulder, Colorado, that filed a lawsuit against the federal government in managing the federal timberland around my community. He filed a lawsuit representing the grizzly bear under the Endangered Species Act. He wanted all logging stopped. He wants an international peace park where I live. He calls it Columbia Mountains, so that's his vision. And to get us to stop all management, he filed the first lawsuit for the grizzly bear, and it made me immediately question his environmental credentials. Because if we're not managing and nature is, do you know how fast a grizzly bear can run? 35 miles an hour in short spurts. Do you know how fast a wildfire burns in the Rocky Mountains? As fast as the wind is blowing for as long as it blows. And when we have so much fuel out there, these fires that are burning unnaturally hot because of 100 years of fire suppression, trees that should have been killed when they were 2 feet tall are now 102 feet tall because we've put fires out. That, by the way, is at odds with what the School of Forestry at the University of Montana has told us we should have been doing for 3 decades. We should have been letting the fires burn a little bit of the forest up a little bit at a time, and instead, we've saved it by putting the fires out, and now we've got too many trees. And when these fires burn out west, they're not invigorating topsoil and growing huckleberries. There are forested areas in Montana where the forest fires are burning so hot that the clay soils are being fired into ceramics. It's going to take eons to grow the next generation of forests because we're pretending after 100 years of human interference in the natural cycle, nature can now weigh in and be benign. So it made me question Jasper's environmental credentials. I didn't have to question for long, though, because when the media called him and said, "What do you really want?" he said, "I want to stop all logging." And if that grizzly bear lawsuit doesn't work, then I'm going to represent the bank-hugging monkey flower, the bastard flax, the Coeur d'Alene salamander, the northern caribou. He had 12 lawsuits, 12 species lined up, and the National Forest Service now is not managing your forest. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals is. There's something wrong with that. And we're not alone. It's not just, oh, by the way, Vincent Logging does not currently employ 65 others. As I speak, we employ none. We have 12 billion board feet of dead and dying timber standing around my town, but we've kept some logging equipment and modified it to be firefighting equipment because we're protecting ourselves from the fires that are going to consume your forest. There's got to be a better way. Logging communities are no longer alone. Something's wrong in mining communities when mining reform should be a promise of clean air, clean water, while we provide strategically important metals and minerals for society. And instead, mining reform is used as a bludgeoning device to drive mining companies out of places like Colorado and into places like Venezuela and Peru. Something's wrong when grazing reform should be a promise of good forage, clean water for future ranching families. It should not be a bludgeoning device that drives grazing families, ranchers, out of places like New Mexico and into places like Argentina. Something's wrong when professional resource managers have lost or abdicated their ability to manage to professional litigants in court, whose agenda has more to do with greed, power control, and social engineering than it does environmental stewardship. Something's wrong when America is in love with the environment, but willing to get important information on this important subject from such noted experts as Dr. Meryl Streep. She was the first Hollywood actress to weigh in on our issues. Do you guys remember Alar? It was a joke. It was a scientific joke. She was finally proven wrong, but before she was proven wrong, she destroyed apple-growing families and communities in the state of Washington and the state of New York for 2 years. Dr. Woody Harrelson, have you seen him? Hanging from the Golden Gate Bridge, CNN was out there interviewing him on redwood forestry like he's an expert. He's a pot-smoking loon. And Dr. Ted Turner, just because he once owned a stinking satellite, that does not make him an expert on whatever bounces off of it. But when these folks spew their misinformation, disinformation, half-truths, pseudoscience at an unknowing public, and when the media prints that crap as the truth, that's what we base public policy on. And what kind of lens does America have to run this stuff through? Is it the lens of the Kansas State student? Is it the lens of the The person that's involved at the ground level, no. They don't have that lens anymore. They've got 50 years of Bambi under their belt. They think before you showed up in Kansas, wolves were raising orphaned rabbits in a sea of old growth. They have no idea that in the real world, the wolf eats the rabbit, and they don't have a party right after that. They have been sold this Disney-esque ecotopia, this harmony and balance, butterflies flitting in a beautiful green field, until at the 20-minute mark of every single Disney movie, what happens? Who shows up? The bad guy, the anti-environmentalist, the anti-balance, anti-harmony, and it's man. Nature is good, man is evil. For 50 years they've been getting that crap. They perfected the argument during the last decade, by the way. It's not just any man that's bad. It's industrial man, capitalist man. That's the real enemy. I don't know how many of you remember the World Trade Organization riots in Seattle. Do you guys remember them? The Rainforest Action Network from the University of Montana, like we've got a lot of rainforests in Montana to protect, they were in the streets of Seattle with the World Trade Organization, and when they had the meeting there, they were throwing USA Today boxes through Starbucks windows and proclaiming capitalism to be the biggest threat to our planet, which was a shock to every developing country in attendance. You get outside the rich borders of this nation and reality smacks you in the face. The leading degrader of planet Earth isn't profit, it's poverty. When poverty is driving some nations bust, the environment's way in the back behind food, clothing, shelter, the basic human rights. They're not debating view sheds in Zimbabwe. They're talking about supper tomorrow. And sadly, what this nation threatens to become is a leading threat to our global environment through misguided lockup of our own. Because we don't want to address consumption, but we're more than happy to address production. It's awful. So what we do is we run the risk of importing raw products from developing countries that are long on resources, long on population, and short on cash, importing raw products from those nations and exporting the burdens of production. And they will send us our crap using methods we quit using 30 years ago, and we'll call it green because we don't have to look at it. There's a thin line between environmental sensitivity and environmental insanity. And in this country, we're crossing the line. How did we get so crazy on this issue? How did we get to the point where they're blowing up animal labs in universities like this, and they call that ecotage, like it's a white-collar planet to save animals, or white-collar crime to save animals? Earth First blew our logging equipment up. There's a little caption on page 6 of the Missoulian that said, ecotage had been practiced in the mountains of Montana. They blew our crap up. That's terrorism. How did we get to that point? I go back to the 60s. You guys don't remember the 60s, but you guys do. A lot of my generation has a problem with the 60s, though. We might not have inhaled, but we ate the entire plate of brownies. That's what happened to us. And now we're in leadership. Woo! What happened in the 60s that's really important, though, for your generation particularly, is we got the first social media tool in our living room, called it television, pushed it in the living room close enough to the dining room so we could watch Walter Cronkite while we ate. And for the first time in human history, you didn't have to live someplace to know what was happening there in real time. I was a kid in Montana when the Cuyahoga River caught on fire and burned for a week through Cleveland. You guys ever seen that in your history books? Rivers on fire in America? I remember it. I wasn't very old. I was living in Montana, but I remember looking at the tube thinking, rivers should not burn their bridges up. Maybe we should have a law against that. You didn't have to live in Pennsylvania to know that Lake Erie was dying. We got to watch the fish swimming alongside up every night. You didn't have to live in LA to know their air was turning purple. Then from the eyeballs of a humanoid in a spaceship almost to the moon, we got to see our little blue ball called Earth from a distance. It was kind of bobbing along in blackness. What happened in the 60s is we figured out we have one planet. We're only getting one planet, and some of the stuff we were doing to it needed to stop. We joined in factor and spirit the American environmental movement. We empowered groups like the Sierra Club and Audubon and Wilderness Society. We needed them to help get laws on the books. If a group didn't exist, we started one. I was a leader of the first Earth Day in our town. We picked up crap in the creek going by the school. A friend of mine was a forest ecology student at the University of British Columbia, a logger's son. He didn't like the atom bomb dropping on the Bikini Atoll, so he and a friend started Greenpeace. We needed these groups and this movement to help us get laws like the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Endangered Species Act, Multiple Use Sustained Yield Act, a couple dozen major pieces of legislation designed to take care of home. But the movement we empowered and the laws that came out of it, they're 30, 40, 50 years old, and they're both showing their age. The laws have been bastardized through regulatory regimes and through judicial activism until they don't even resemble what they were supposed to be. The Endangered Species Act was to protect species from human-caused extirpation. Wasn't supposed to be a social engineering device for a lunatic in Boulder to smear my town off the map. The Clean Water Act was to be a promise to the American farmer, not a threat to the American farmer. The environmental movement itself, it's alive. I met with a dendrology class and some wildlife biologists this morning. That's the environmental movement. You students being here at Kansas State, learning how to do a better job, participating in research, how we can do an incrementally better job of taking care of the environment and providing for humans. That's the movement. Anybody in here have an EcoBoost Ford engine? That's the environmental movement. We didn't used to have them. Caterpillar and Shell got together. They now make an engine. If you park that sucker in the Los Angeles air basin, the air going in is dirtier than the air coming out. That's the environmental movement. It's putting to use the science that's learned in academia into the real world so we can have a lighter footprint and providing for humans. That's the movement. It's deciding what kind of bag you're going to put your groceries in. How many of you ever had Every Day's Earth Day for a farmer on your bumper? In logging, we have Every Day's Earth Day for a logger. We also have Earth First. We'll log the rest of the planets later, but we don't wear that one as much. The movement itself is alive. It's in the questions you ask about how you can participating in doing just a little bit better job than the previous generation. That is the environmental movement. It's you being engaged in this campus. It's alive, but the leadership of that old movement, some of them hijacked it. They learned during the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s that they could make a lot of money marketing just one product, and it's not conservation or stewardship that they sell. It's fear. They learned that they could scare people out of billions of dollars a year if they have the right message. So they have honed their business practices, stole the social movement, and turned it into an industry of conflict. They've got to have problems in order to sell their wares. And they're still using that tube. Only now the television comes in a bunch of different forms. How many of you have a smartphone? iPad, computer screen, YouTube. There's a whole bunch of ways to share our story now. And what do they do in the complex issues you're studying at Kansas State? When they present them to the American public, how do they do it? They do 2 20-second YouTubes. First YouTube are the people who they are going to smear around. If they're going to do a spot on forestry, I know what the forestry background is going to visually be. And visuals are important. 83% of what we remember comes through our eyeballs. So here we are looking at our phone, and we want to talk about forestry. What's the background visual for forest management? It's the world's butt ugliest clear cut. You can see the sucker from the moon. That's forestry. The last tree falling into a sea of stumps. Crash. That's forestry. And if they want to talk to somebody, who do they get? They go to Seattle, get a 3-piece suit and tie from Weyerhaeuser, and standing in front of a 30-story building, he says, America wants wood fiber, and by God, we provide it. Or they go to Oregon and they find some knuckle-dragging Neanderthal with snooze dribbling down his chin. He says, God, I like to make stumps, and he's wearing a Eat a Owl t-shirt. You've all seen the guy. God, I wish he'd stay home. That's forestry. And who's the next 20-second YouTube? It's a guy who doesn't like us. And what do? They get to stand in front of a babbling brook with a pristine mountain scene behind them, and with a flag in one hand and bald eagle in the other, they say, all I want is clean air and water for my children. And they point out that everybody in that last soundbite are greedy corporate bastards intent on profit alone. And America gets to pick. And every complex natural resource issue that you're studying on this campus is boiled down into those 2 easy choices. What a banner year last year was to discuss oil with this nation. You ask a fifth grader what oil looks like, and they'll begin defining dead black birds bobbing in the dead black Gulf. Oil is that. And the guy who doesn't like it stands in front of the Everglades with the flag in one hand, bald eagle in the other. All he wants, clean air and water. Mining, they'll go to Butte, Montana. A dead bird's bobbing in a settling pond in Yellow Rivers. That's mining. The mistakes were made 100 years ago. And the guy who doesn't like mining stands in front of the Continental Divide. Agriculture, when the World Trade Organization riots were going on and they had international television on it, every single time they discussed domestic American agriculture, every single time they showed a crop duster. American agriculture is the application of chemicals, period. And the guy doesn't like it, standing beside the Des Moines River. What about animal agriculture? How many of you here are in animal agriculture? How many of you here have seen the YouTube of the black and white spotted cow with the forklift through the side getting drugged through 6 inches of manure somewhere? That's animal agriculture. And the guy doesn't like it is Wayne Pacelli with the Humane Society, and he's petting a puppy, and all he wants to do is save the puppy, and America gets to pick. And when we see that crap, we get angry, because we know those aren't the choices. Conservation and stewardship are somewhere in between those two extremes. But America doesn't know that. There are 3 generations from the farm. I know Hyatt, you said 2. I think it's 3 now. They have no natural resource linkage. They don't have grandma's farm to go back to in Iowa for 2 weeks in the summer and watch the cow eat and poop and make milk. They don't have that anymore. And we've laughed at them about what they don't know. How many of you have ever said the stupid people in Kansas City think milk comes from a carton at Safeway? In the timber industry, we'd say those dumb people in Seattle think boards just show up at Home Depot, and on sale day, a bunch of boards show up. In fact, we kind of feel a little haughty about what we know and what they don't, because we don't really think we've got a lot of legs up on our urban cousins, but we dang well know where their stuff comes from. Their ignorance, though, is not laughable. These are the people that give our consent to operate. They're the ones that give us our social license. And they're not ignorant because they're stupid. They're ignorant because they don't have information. And put yourself in their shoes for a minute. If you were one of them and you were watching these 2 choices, you were seeing the cow being abused or Wayne Pacelli petting a puppy. And if you lived in a 30-story high-rise in downtown Kansas City and you had 1 functioning brain cell, why, you'd move. No, that's not nice. The urban folks we are sharing this discussion with are smart people trying to make a very difficult decision on a very complex issue. And if you were them and it were boiled down to those 2 easy choices, what would you pick? You'd never pick dirty water over agriculture. You would never pick animal abuse. You'd pick animal welfare. You'd never pick the world's butt ugliest clear cut. So America has been making the right choice. They've just been given the wrong things to choose from. And that illuminates our issue. And there's now an entire industry out there that's built on giving them these false choices. And they really aren't the problem. The problem is they can sell that stuff. The problem is they've got a market they can deliver to. And by the way, they're looking for a new issue, because forestry isn't working for them much anymore. In the timber industry, we started figuring out that we weren't doing ourselves any favor. Look up timber wars sometime under Google and you'll see 15,000 loggers in downtown Seattle and Portland and 80 miles of logging trucks going up and down I-5, bottling up the cities. I was in the lead truck. I was the guy with the bullhorn marching on the Capitol buildings. And it took us a while to figure out we were the 3rd ring of a 3-ring circus. And somebody else was taking the gate receipts. We were the tit for the conflict industry's tat. They needed us as part of their business strategy. We were driving their story to the front page where they got to ask America, you want the marching Neanderthals to whack all the trees down, or do you want to send us $20 and we'll save the forest? We were making them billions. So we backed up away from that and decided that we needed to address what the public was concerned about. We started listening to the public because we'd spent too much time standing on street corners and yelling our truth at them, telling them what we wanted them to hear. What we should have done was ask them what they want to know. What concerns did they have, and how can we be part of their answer? When we finally figured that out, we developed what was called the Healthy Forest Initiative, the most progressive forest language since Teddy Roosevelt was signed into law by George Bush. And the whole basis of it is if we have healthy forests, we'll have healthy forest communities. And our management should be looking at how to keep our forests healthy. So we've got a light at the end of our timber community tunnel. Sadly for you folks, that light is a train. Because that industry that was making billions of dollars off us, they need a new piñata. They have to have an issue that they can beat on to generate cash. And it's been clear to me for the last 10 years, the two issues that they're going to hammer home are anything that has to do with water and anything that has to do with animals. And that puts you folks squarely in the crosshairs of this industry of conflict. So what can you do? You can avoid doing what we did. We thought the enemy was the public. We thought the enemy was just the public's ignorance. And that's part of it. The real problem is our ignorance. Our ignorance of the process of leading this discussion and not just fighting it. We confused fighting with leading. And your generation can't afford to do that with American agriculture. And what excites me is I see leaders. The food for thought, holy crap, thank you guys. Thank you guys for choosing to be in a natural resource campus. When you're here, learn to lead. It's one thing that we did a terrible job. We did pretty good at fighting. But if we want to lead, we have to address some things. The public needs to be addressed. They need to be told the truth. Warts, pimples, and all. We can't run from the truth. It's got to be our basis for every argument. But when we're presenting them with the truth, we also have to remember that we have to speak in their language to their concerns. We should not be telling them the truth that we want them to know. We should ask them, what do you want to know? What do you want to know about GMOs? What do you want to know about safe food chains? What do you want to know? And then owning the science, this is where you learn it, owning the science and packaging your discussion so that you can be part of their solution. And what a story American agriculture has to tell. Holy cow. I saw the signs all the way here from Kansas City. One Kansas farmer feeds 155 people. That's a thumbs up. And by the way, the farmer's doing it on less land every single year. Production agriculture allows us to do more on less land. And that's really good news for the loggers. Because that marginal land that used to try to grow cotton and corn is going back to what God intended it to be. And in most areas in America, that's trees. So we've got more forest land now in America than we did at the turn of the 1900s because of you guys. That's good news stuff. Macroeconomically, how many of you in here are in ag economics? Holy cow, what a story. We're living the story that you guys have to tell. The biggest drought, in some places even bigger than the Depression, has been sweeping through these areas, the Central Plains, for the last, 5-10 years? But have we had a dust bowl? No, because farming practices, the things you learned about farming from the last mistakes, have disallowed that to happen again. A deeper drought than before and no dust bowl. And what's that meant? When we hit the recession in our nation in 2009, we didn't tank as a nation because agriculture didn't tank. The foundation for our macroeconomics never went under this time. In the Depression they did and the whole country sank. This time you didn't. What a wonderful story. We're a little hesitant to stand up and beat our chests though, particularly students of science like you guys. Because how many of you know that things aren't perfect out there? How many of you know we've made mistakes in the past? How many of you know mistakes are being made today? How many of you know we're going to make mistakes in the future? Providing for humankind is an inexact science, and no one knows that better than you. So we're hesitant to stand up at a microphone and proclaim our perfectness. Well, you know what? We don't have to. Because there's one truth the American public needs to accept. We understand we're not perfect, but as imperfect as we are, you represent, as imperfect as you are the safest, most productive, most efficient, most environmentally sound producers of food in the history of man. And if the American public wants to make a green choice, they'll choose the American producer. They'll want their cattle to come from Kansas and not Argentina. They'll want their milk to come from America and not Mexico or China. They'll want their boards to come from Montana and not Siberia. We are the green choice. But we've got to learn to lead them to that point. And we do that by three things that we forgot, that we learned the hard way, three truths. And you folks, truth number one that we learned the hard way, democracy works, but it's not a spectator sport. How many of you are sick and tired of politics? Makes you want to puke after what we just got through. Holy crap. But as ugly as it is, it's the best way to effect bloodless revolution. That's what we're having. We're having these sweeps and not a shots being fired. Cool stuff. We've got to be engaged in that process. And being engaged means more than voting. It means supporting people once you get them into office. How many of you want your leaders to take courageous stands for agriculture? You're at an institution of agriculture. How many of you want your elected leaders, whether it's a county commissioner or conservation board or your state capital or Washington, D.C., do you want them to take courageous stands for agriculture? Yeah. How many of you had somebody's name on your bumper this last election cycle? Ask yourself as you move forward, if you don't have the guts to stick their name on your bumper, how can you have the gall to ask them to climb out on a political limb with the illumination of the media? If we don't stand with our leaders, they won't stand for us. Your generation has to embrace democracy, and that means supporting those that support you. So that they know there's a constituency out there that's going to go like this when they do the good thing and hold them accountable when they do the bad thing. And voting is part of it. I know that process really well. I've learned it through my son. Being engaged in public policy classes, another good thing to do. Communication classes, another good thing to do. Journalism, another good thing to do. Learn how to communicate, learn how the process works. My oldest boy has learned the hard way. He wanted to be a logger, so he went to Oregon State, another land grant school, the forest engineering program at Oregon State. But they gave him the bad news at the end of his sophomore year. They told him they would only guarantee placement upon graduation if he had 2 foreign languages. And they suggested Russian and Portuguese. That told him the Amazon and Siberia. So he quit school, came home and logged for a year. Then he went to the University of Montana, got a political science degree with a minor in communications and forestry. He's decided politics has more to do with managing our trees than forest management did, at least for him. He's been elected 3 times our state representative, and night before last, he got elected for the 2nd time our state senator with 77% of the vote. The kid is kicking butt in Helena. He's the chair of our Natural Resource Committee, the chair of our Water Interim Committee, the chair of our Tax Committee. He sits on Judiciary. And he and a generation, your generation, are really making a difference in places like Montana because they're embracing the democratic process. Second truth is when people lead, leaders follow. You have a bunch of leaders in Topeka. How many of them have ag backgrounds? Is that a growing number of people or a shrinking number of people? It's a growing number of people that have no ag resource. They're no different than the rest of society, and they want to take care of Kansas and the environment, and they want to save rural Kansas. And if you aren't whispering in their ear that they don't have to choose between agriculture and clean water, somebody's going to tell them they do. So you'd better be able to articulate how they can have both. You'd better be able to talk to your leaders, your community, your friends. Talk to them about the false choices. Talk to them about what you know to be true. When people lead, leaders follow. And what I saw today in that class earlier, what I see here today, a bunch of leaders of tomorrow. But you've got to saddle the horse. Final truth is the world is run by those who show up. I thank you for showing up to this. Thank you for showing up at Kansas State. When you get done with your career, though, there are going to be meetings held every day talking about the future of agriculture in the state that you call home. And we can complain about the religious zealots that show up at every single meeting and talk about wanting to be done with swine production, or we can plop our butt down next to them and compare visions. They're going to keep showing up. What we've got to do is commit to being part of the discussion. And what I ask you folks to do is consider engaging in classes during your academic career so that you can more fully engage in showing up in the public body. How many of you have already had your communications classes? How many of you like that stuff? Our culture, our rural culture has an issue with that crap, don't we? It's kind of countercultural. I didn't go into logging because I want to jack my jaw in front of people. It makes me want to puke. You guys aren't going into agriculture because you want to stand up in front of crowds and bare your soul. But you know what? It's got to be part of your life. In fact, I ask people in agriculture right now to add a line item to their business plan. It should be part of the economic process of doing business in agriculture to have a line item for activism, advocacy, being engaged in the discussion. And activism for a long time has had a bad rap in rural areas. When I told my old man we had to become activists, I got a look from him. I'll tell you what, Jasper had just filed the first lawsuit, shut down a third of our forest. Dad was out in the shop welding on machinery. It was springtime, so I went out in the shop and I said, "Hey, Father Old Person." He flipped the welding helmet up. I can still see the smoking rod in his hand. And I said, "Dad, if we're going to survive, we're going to have to become activists." And he gave me a look. Holy crap, grow hair to my butt and smoke pot? Maybe we should just have the auction, you know? And that isn't what it's not throwing USA Today boxes through Starbucks windows. It's showing up in the social media. It's tweeting about what you know to be true. It's having a blog. It's having a Facebook site. It's sharing with your friends over your backyard fence what you know to be true. That's activism. And part of being in your industry, in your career path, is going to have to include that if we want to maintain our social license to operate. So where are we? There's a thin line between environmental sensitivity and environmental insanity, and we're crossing the line. We got there because the truth has been outrun by lies for so long the public doesn't recognize the truth and are making some terrible choices about protecting our environment. In fact, they're protecting it to death. Public land timber communities were the first thing in the crosshairs, but now the rest of agriculture is. And the way we get out of this is we address the enemy, and the enemy is ignorance. The public's ignorance of the truth and our ignorance of the process of leading this discussion and not just fighting it. So after all of that crap, how can I possibly have hope? You guys give me hope. The next generation gives me hope. Your generation is asking questions that my generation forgot. My speaking gives me hope. I travel around the country and it used to be just jacking my jaw at the choir. Now it's the American Banking Association annual meeting. They're trying to figure this stuff out macroeconomically. It's the Las Vegas Chamber of Commerce. They're trying to figure it out. The National Association of Counties, other people are trying to figure this out. America is ready. They're tired of the doom and gloom, bongo drum beating, incense burning, planet is dying, crap that they've been getting since they were 5. They're tired of hearing their skin's going to fall off in 12.2 years. They're tired of hearing what's wrong and ready to hear what can be right. They're ready for a new environmental leader. They're not going to accept and should not accept somebody who is anti-environment, anti-animal welfare. But they want new leaders of the discussion. They're ready for a new vision of environmentalism built on hope instead of fear, science instead of emotion, education instead of litigation, resolution instead of conflict, and employing rather than destroying human resources. And that new movement's going to be led by rural people because we live too close to the ground to pretend. And they're ready for that. I'm going to close with a cultural plea. America is ready to hear us stand up in this discussion. And I applaud you guys for being involved in academia so that you've got the foundation to stand on. When you do stand, I encourage you to remember something. What's at stake in this discussion is not the industry of agriculture. It's not agribusiness that's at stake. Because industry is going to survive. If I was fighting for the timber industry, I would have quit 30 years ago because mission accomplished. The question isn't, are we going to provide for humankind by manipulating the environment? That's a given. There are going to be 9 to 11 billion souls on earth wanting food, clothing, and shelter every single day. So somebody is going to do it. The question isn't, are we going to have industry? It's, are we going to have industry in America? Are we going to have a production culture in our country? Or are we just going to order in? So what's at stake in this discussion is our culture of production. The people who inhabit that mythical flowchart of industry. That's what's at stake. And when my butt gets tired and I'm flying away from my wife and I have to convince myself that it's worth doing it, what I remember is something that may have happened in your family. What keeps the fire in my belly going is the cultural battle that's been going on for 30 or 40 years in our rural areas. What keeps me going is the third grade. Do you take the Iowa Basics test in Kansas? Or wherever you're from, test to tell how smart or dumb you are? We took that in the third grade in Montana, and when the principal and teacher got the results back in, they called Mom and Dad into school. And I was laying awake waiting for them, because when the principal calls Dad, life as you know it's about to come to a screaming halt. Dad didn't know for 30 years that I overheard the conversation, though, but I did, because we lived in a trailer house at that time, little thin walls. And what they talked about in our living room in our little timber town was how to keep me from being a logger. Because my dad had been told that night that if I ended up being a logger, it was his fault. And for the first time in that proud man's life, like tens of millions like him, instead of looking down at his hands and seeing calluses on his palms and dirt under his fingernails, and that being a source of pride, because it built our company, it built our town, it built our state, it built our stinking nation. For the first time in his life, it was not a source of pride. It was a source of shame and guilt, because he got the message. The message was, I had scored high on the Iowa Basics test, and I was going to be too smart to be a dumb old logger like him. He had a heritage that wasn't worthy of passing on, at least to intelligent children. He got the message, and he wrapped that mantle of guilt around his neck and wore it for decades. And if there's one thing I hope didn't go into the ground with him, it is that mantle. Because I got to work with him. I got to work with him for 40 years. And when we were standing out in the nation's forest, looking at a hillside of trees, trying to figure out how to apply modern forest management to the hillside, I had 2 degrees hanging on the wall. Dad didn't have a 1, and there was a stupid person standing there, and it was not my father. He had more sustainable environmental information in his brain that came to him through his hands than he could have gotten with a doctorate degree from Yale. But his was experiential. He learned by doing. And society has somehow decided to discount that knowledge base. They continue the discount at their own peril. I'm a big believer in higher education. All 4 of my kids have completed college. You have got to have that as a foundation to stand on. But when you leave the Institute of Kansas State, I know your instructors will tell you all the theory you learn here is just theory that floats around in the na-na land until a real person takes it to the real world and applies it with their real hands. What's at stake in this discussion is the laboratory where you take Kansas State research and apply it to the real world to try to do a better job. And what happens if we convince people, as Yahoo did last year, 5 of the 10 worst careers you can pick were ag-related? Good God! 9 to 11 billion people wanting food, clothing, and shelter, and they pick ag to... It should not be the career of last resort. The leading export of our rural areas cannot be our young, well-educated, well-rounded children, or what will we be left with? Scary Larry and his idiot brother in a 1952 John Deere tractor doing what? We need our smart kids back. That's why I love coming to places like this, because I see the next generation of intelligence that is proud to grab the mantle. And if my kids want to go into farming or ranching or mining, or we're able to have my grandkids go into logging during the next generation, they're going to grab the flag without a social class head trip. I am proud of our heritage. I'm proud of your heritage. It's worthy of grabbing a hold of. And that, for me, is what's at stake. I'm going to leave you with what Mom left me with. I have no idea. I actually wrote a speech, and I have no idea where I'm at in the sucker. When you leave this, food for thought doesn't end here. when you guys are done with your campus life, Food for Thought has got to be part of your career path. You've got to take your message of truth out, engage the public, listen to your friends, find out what they want to know, gather the information to be the answer, gather the information to be their green choice. But you don't have to try to eat the entire elephant alone. What you need to do is commit to doing something to be an advocate. And I have a terrible tendency to try to eat elephants, so my mom left me with this when she checked out, and I leave it with you. It is from numberless diverse acts of courage and belief that human history is shaped. Each time a man stands up for an ideal or acts to improve the lot of others or strikes out against injustice, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope. And crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring, those ripples build a current that can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. Bobby Kennedy, South Africa, 1966. It's also Kansas State, 2014. You don't have to decide that you've got to be a wave out there. What you have to do is commit to learning how to be a ripple. And together, you'll make a wave. There's a way to save the last best places. It's going to take the next generation of last best people to do it. And this logger from Montana couldn't be prouder to stand with you trying to figure it out. God bless.
Thank you, Bruce. We'll probably have time for a few questions if we have any questions from the audience.
Does anybody want to know how to get to Libby? We really need the tourists. We asked the University of Montana how much tourism we need in Libby to make up for the jobs we've lost in the timber industry. Because I want to live there, and if tourism will do it, rock and roll. But how much tourism does it take to upgrade our sewage treatment plant before we dump our effluent into our Blue River trout stream? How much does it take to keep our third best in the United States school doors open? We sweat blood building them. We'd like quality instructors in front of our kids with computers on their desks. How much tourism does that take? How much tourism does it take to keep our hospital doors open? It's 90 miles to the next one. And the University of Montana gave us a startling number, which is why I ask if you're going to come. We need $100 million of tourism in Libby each summer. That's 1 million people coming to town, and each one spending $100. If you do come, we're going to set up roadblocks and take wallets and purses. That's how that's going to work. Or you don't leave without a major appliance. You guys are in ag econ, don't even have to have a pickup. We got unemployed loggers. We'll weld that sucker to your bumper. Bungee strap the Maytag to your hood. Our bigger question, though, is if we could get industrial tourism to work, look what we've learned about it as a sole engine in an area. We've learned industrial tourism, the things they come to enjoy, pays the price of enjoyment. We learned it in Yosemite and in Glacier and in Yellowstone. It can be part of the rural pie, but it can't be the whole pie. Anybody have any questions?
I think the group would be interested in what you shared with me about when you cut trees, then you plant. Fill in that story.
About how we do sustainable forestry. We plant 6 trees for every one we harvest. That's part of what we learned. In fact, in federal land, there's a law that says you have to have the forest restocked within 5 years. So we plant 6, and they're not very big. And deer and elk and stuff don't like to eat big trees, but they'll munch the top off a new one. So we plant 6 and hope that 6 of them make it through, or one of them makes it through. And if it doesn't, we have 5 years to replant and keep trying to restock. The disturbance regime. How many of you were in the class this morning? We talked in some detail about that. The forests that are growing out there right now are largely lodgepole pine. They're a species that doesn't live very long. 90 to 120 years is old for a lodgepole pine tree. And they have heat-sensitive cones that only pop open during forest fires. So they grow for about 100 years, die and burn for a day, pop open cones, grow for 100 years, burn for a day, grow for 100 years. The last time where I lived burned down was in 1910. The largest recorded fire in North American history. It started in Spokane, Washington with 100 little lightning fires. A cold front with 75-mile-an-hour winds came through, blew those 100 into one great big fire that burned across the panhandle of Idaho, through northwestern Montana, and into Canada in a week. 3 million acres went woof. It's now a monoculture of all one age class of trees that are at the mature stage. They're dead, they're dying, and they're ready to burn. So when I say that we're parking our equipment around our home in the summer, we've got Katrina of the forest sitting up there, and we're praying that society's desire to protect is corrected by Forest Service management before we burn to the ground. It was that fire, by the way, that generated Smokey the Bear. The American public was incensed that we were burning our forest down. They called it also the summer without a sun, because around America and Canada, that yellow ball turned orange until snow flew. There was that much CO2 and smoke pumped into the air. They think it lowered the global temperature a half a degree. Large single event carbon release. So we invented Smokey the Bear, and we put lookouts on all the mountains, and for 100 years now, whenever there's been a little puff of smoke, we've run out and stomped on it and ignored the science that was being learned at the University of Montana, where they said we should have been letting the fires burn a little bit of the forest up. Because now we have the exact opposite problem of what America thinks. They think we're almost out of trees. We have too many of them. Of the wrong size, the wrong type, in the wrong place. Trees that should have been killed when they were little are now big. And the fires that are burning are not natural. They're unnaturally huge, catastrophically hot. But us standing on street corners and shouting that truth didn't do anything for the public until we answered their questions. And we have had to convince them that starting a chainsaw is not a bad thing for a forest all the time. You had a question?
Yeah, I was going to ask, for those of the younger generation here that are getting ready to go out and be the new leaders in our community, what are one or two things that you can suggest for us to take that first step and get involved?
Take that first step. I suggest that in the local area where you're going, join the Chamber of Commerce or the Rotary Club. Seriously. They're going to be your business peers. Those people are going to be some folks that you can talk to about and listen to. Join groups that have opinion leaders in your community. A lot of us don't think that we belong in the Chamber of Commerce because you don't have a street sign on Main Street. You know, you're kind of out there in the buckwheat. But Chambers of Commerce, they're the reason we got the Healthy Forest Initiative passed. No loggers in my town belong to the chamber. And we'd be mad at them because you guys are promoting tourism and crap, but you never talk about the real industry in town. Well, we didn't belong. So we joined. They supported the state chamber. We had 60 loggers join our local chamber, and they got the National Chamber of Commerce involved, and we got our initiative passed. So part of doing business, part of being engaged in this culture of production is going to be engaging your peers. So when you go into business in your career, ask whoever you're working for, can you be the person that shows up at Rotary or a Chamber of Commerce? And then use social media. These decisions by the American public are emotional decisions that are not going to be made in a boardroom somewhere. They're made in a living room somewhere, over backyard fences. And a lot of rural folks, my generation, are scared to death of social media. Holy cow, it's a loose cannon out there. I see it as your generation's biggest opportunity. I call it our committees of correspondence. You guys study them in history? Committees of course, you know why we beat the British? One of the biggest reasons? They had an ocean to communicate across, and we were galloping from tavern to tavern. It was called the Committees of Correspondence. That's the new social media. Can you deal with is it the Kansas City Star? The big city newspapers, they like to print conflict. They like to print fights on the front page. That's what sells them. So are we going to really get a fair hearing there? I don't know. I wouldn't even worry about them, though. Social media, Facebook. You can do your YouTubes. The Peterson brothers. Anybody know them? Holy crap. Yeehaw! I'm speaking to a whole generation in a voice that generation listens to. And last time I looked, they had like 20 million views. Those aren't all farmers clicking in. That's your peers. So use the media to communicate. Poke one button, talk to 3,000 people about what you know to be true. Then speak with an open ear. Listen, 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 listen. Because if you start talking at somebody instead of with them, they're going to freeze up on you. Listen and then answer questions. So social media and peer groups. And you're with Agro Women? Find a group within industry. I don't care if it's Farm Bureau, Agro Women. There's also Women in Agriculture. I think there are two. There's Women in Farm Economics. There's, holy crap, if one doesn't suit you, start one. I mean, there are a lot of groups out there where people like you are going to be joining forces so that you can be a ripple and together make a wave. So find something within the industry of your choice. How many of you are going to vet school? Veterinarians are getting aggressive on these issues. So join your professional associations and help them move incrementally your ball forward. And communicate. And come to Libby. Oh, that's the first thing I should have said. You need to come to Libby and buy a Maytag. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
This summer I had the opportunity to work on some videos, and the person I was working with kind of brought up the point of, one, how do we make the general public that we're trying to reach listen to us? When we post a YouTube video or whatever, why should they care?
The question is, how do we get the public to care and actually want to look at it? First thing is to listen. What are they proclaiming they care about? And then engage there. We keep wanting them to care about the things we care about. That's what we did in timber. We'd shout at them the truth that we were so concerned about. When we finally started listening to them and started answering what was on their mind, then they started listening to us. So listen to the public and find out what they want. The Peterson brothers, people are watching YouTube music videos. So they got in their head, shared a message that was kind of a catchy tune, but they shared. So number one, listen. What are they concerned about? And then figure out the avenues they're using to get that information. We spend too much time trying to shove our truth down the throat of people that we want to be interested in our craft. We should listen to them. What are they interested in? How are they sharing their concerns? And get involved in that arena. There are some farm groups that are now dealing with the Food Network. People are really interested in their food and where it's coming from and chefs and stuff like that. So they're tuned into that. So engage. Wherever they're engaged in expressing their concerns, weigh in and be the answer to their concerns. By the way, I'm a big believer in niche markets. When you do get involved in industry, though, if you're interested in organic, don't beat up on your allies in production in order to sell your wares. We need both. And it's a really dangerous path. The timber industry did a $40 million wood is good campaign when we were shoving crap down people's throat. We thought we'll just buy enough airtime in the Super Bowl and stuff like that and everybody will love us. And the whole concept was missing. Wood is good was never the issue. Our industry crashed when we had the highest commodity use in history. Highest wood prices. We were importing wood from New Zealand and Chile and Russia and wood is good. Like that was look at this crap. It's everywhere. People love it. It's stumps that suck. And we didn't spend a dime on talking to the public about the stump. We left that discussion to the Sierra Club, who said the stumps do suck. So people wanted wood, they just didn't want stumps, so we order it from Africa. I mean, so we need to listen and not beat up on our allies. By the way, the rest of wood is good, was steel is bad, aluminum is bad, concrete's bad. All of our friends are icky because we're wonderful, and that makes us wonderful. Don't do that. If you're in ag economics and you get involved in organic, and I love organics, I love farm to fork stuff, but when people start telling me that that's the way we ought to be doing all of this, I immediately say, I like bananas. And we can't grow them in Libby. You know, it means we're going to have production agriculture somewhere to swap crap, you know. We can have farm to fork and production agriculture. So don't present false choices when you're making an argument for your niche. Okay. Go up to Highway 2 and turn left. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming again tonight, and look forward to the Spring Upson Lecture on Monday, March 2nd. We'll be having Charlie Arnott from the Center for Food Integrity, so we'll have another great speaker here. Hopefully you guys can all be in attendance.